Well, good morning. Welcome to the Powerful Moments Encourage group this morning. We're glad you're here. So, uh, Mark, do you need to do anything about Nona this morning and scheduling? Okay. Use your microphone, please.
We do need to schedule for this week. She's going to start again on Monday at 12:30 again, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And this last week, she was not able to take her treatment her therapy because of other issues going on. So she's going to start back this week. So if anyone. So that leaves us on Wednesday. Is anybody available on Wednesday? That's 20th. So that's got this week, and then the next week I think I can join in probably.
Okay.
Mission accomplished.
Thank you. Does anybody have an update on Billy Brummett? I called Billy on one day this week, and very rarely Kevin answered and said he didn't feel like talking. He said that's the first time he's not felt like talking, and that's not Billy. So, and then we got the email. Excuse me.
What day was that? Early? He was they took him to Centennial. They stretched his esophagus.
Okay, he was at Summit then.
Was it at Summit?
Yeah.
I do know that he got his esophagus stretched, so he had not been eating, and so he was getting weaker.
Yeah.
So they stretched his esophagus, and so he could eat better. And the last I heard, they were trying to make the decision whether to have him go home with hospice or go back to Pavilion for rehab.
Mm-hmm. So Jamie said that they stretched his esophagus this week and I assume that was Summit. That's where he was when I talked to him. So at Summit, and that they were trying to decide, that was to help him eat, so they're trying to decide either to send him to rehab or home with hospice, so one or the other. And then J.D. Thomas is not doing well. He's got a lot of fluid. He can't walk can't even walk 5 steps probably without just being exhausted, a lot of fluid around his lungs and heart. And so keep him in your prayers if you would. So who else I'm forgetting somebody this week. Who? Yeah, Michael Lewis is not doing well, having dialysis 3 times a week, and yeah, so very weak. He's at home though, isn't he, Alan? Yeah, Michael's at home, so. Alan says Michael Lewis's mental condition was good, but his physical condition, he's obviously having a hard time when you have dialysis. Okay. Jill, I saw a lot of backpacks out there at Rebecca's. I think they were backpacks. What's that?
I haven't seen him yet. I'll have to talk to her.
Okay. No backpack announcement then this morning?
That won't start until like mid-September, because that's going to give us 6 weeks to collect.
Okay.
But I have taken up some money for the Bibles, but if anybody else wants to donate, I've got plenty to cover the children's Bibles. I still have to buy the adult Bibles. So if anybody wants to give, I'll put it towards that.
Okay.
Bibles to my back. That way you don't have to buy your own. And the children's Bibles have gone up to like $8 or $9. Last time I think they were $6. So
Wow.
it's like everything else has gone up.
Yeah. So Jill says she'll start promoting the backpack ministry mid-September. Gives about 6 weeks to get that done, and that had donations for the children's Bibles, but can still take donations for the adults' Bibles. So if you're interested in that.
I think we need to remember Helen too, because
Yeah.
Helen has been so sick and has not
Yeah,
been able to
yeah,
be here
yeah.
in several weeks. And also Kim, but Roger said Kim was gonna be here for church, but she has not been feeling well either.
Okay.
But Helen has been out for weeks now with
Yeah.
the kidney problem, and so we need to remember her.
Yeah, I think thank you, Martha, that's who I was trying to think of. I think the kidney problem, the real problem became infection. And so severe infection, so she's been trying to recover from that, so. Oh, so some kind of treatment procedure or something. Alan says October the 15th for Helen Wright, so. Okay, so,
Tom has a procedure Tuesday.
yeah, so, thank you.
On his back.
It's definitely, thank you, Mark, definitely better, but not, yeah, I need to.
Not great.
Not ready for the tennis courts. That's, I gotta get. Oh, no. Wow. Jill was saying was a drowning at the beach this past week where they were, so keep that family obviously in your prayers. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Mark, I was mentioning JD. I'd mentioned him earlier today. I'd spoken to him this week, and yeah, so he can hardly take 5 steps. So he's in a wheelchair, by the way. So I did mention that. So yep. Okay. Anything else before we get started this morning? Okay. Well, we're glad you're here, and we'll get started with prayer. So who would like to open us in prayer? All right, Mark. Thank you.
Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, thank you for this morning. Thank you for our church and family, and thank you for the prayer requests and praise we lifted up to you. I'm sure there's more this morning, Lord. We just lift them all up. Lord, we just give this hour to you, and we pray for Brother Tom, and thank you for the lesson he's bringing. Allow us to hear it, put it in our hearts, Lord, and walk out and use it the way that we act work this week. In Jesus' name I pray.
All right, thank you, Mark. Appreciate that. So, all right. So the title of our lesson, we're in Acts, continuing Acts, studying about Paul's missionary work with the Ephesians and the beginning of the church at Ephesus. And this week we're in Acts chapter 19, verses 23 through 41. And I titled the lesson this week, Souvenirs. So, have you ever gone somewhere and bought a souvenir to remind you of the trip? And if so, what'd you buy? So, Jill, what'd you buy last week on your trip? Not a thing. No shoes or anything. Jill got ice cream instead of souvenirs. Okay. Has anybody ever? What's it?
Magnets.
Magnets on the refrigerator. Where you been? So, for each trip, you get a magnet then, Debbie? Neat. That's a good idea. Shells. You got shells. That's pretty shells from the beach. Jill. Jan's got, oh, go ahead, Becky. Yes, and that's your story, and you're sticking with it, huh? Becky says gets shot glasses as souvenirs, but she says she doesn't use them. So.
of those.
Little spoons that do what now? Oh, which state they were in as a spoon, and the spoon had the name of the state on it. Okay, and you had a map or something you attached them to, or? Wow, that's kind of neat. So, okay. Jan was holding up her bag here from her trip to Rome, so she got a souvenir bag from Rome. So, yeah. So,
Debbie said T-shirts.
T-shirts, I always get T-shirts, yeah. So, Johnny, would you put up that first picture, please? Okay. This is one of the souvenirs that I guess you'd call them souvenirs or something, but when we have, that's a Christmas tree, you know, it's Hallmark's got Christmas in July, so I guess this is Christmas in August. But anyway.
We don't have it up right now.
Well, you know, we're not probably not even sure where it is right now with all our confusion going on. But anyway, during trips to different places, we would get a Christmas tree ornament as a souvenir and hang it on the tree. And then a lot of those are, I guess you'd say, mementos or souvenirs from MTSU or other places that have given us ornaments. And so we have that. So that's something to help us remember trips and other memorable occasions as such. So, all right. Anybody else? Nobody else has gotten souvenirs. All right. So with that, then, Martha, if you would read Acts chapter 19, verses 23 through 27.
Say, what were you? Wait a minute. We've got.
Oh, Debbie and Mark have one. Okay.
I was deployed to Angola, Africa, middle of nowhere. We done their moving the Angolians around so they could have their first re-election. And we got a couple of days off, and we went down to the local market there. And a little kid had these beautiful carvings that they did. I mean, it's a very poor place. And they had these huge carvings and beautiful carvings. Everything was hand done, and he had this bust of a native lady that was about this tall, and it had all the braided hair. I mean, the detail on it was just amazing. The face and everything. I was like, that's pretty cool. How much? And it was like $50. I mean, it was just crazy. So I ended up buying that and a couple of little bowls and stuff for Debbie. I got it home, and she was like, my gosh, it's naked. So needless to say, that bust, that beautiful carving has been in the closet for 30 years.
Well,
She
people.
did just play it for a little bit with a towel around it. Just put it in the closet, honey. I guess.
She said it was quite detailed.
So Debbie and Mark said when Mark was, I repeat this because online they can't necessarily hear this, so they need to hear this. So Mark was in Angola, Africa, in the military, and he had the opportunity to go to the market, and he bought a carving of an African woman, and had a lot of detail. And Debbie says it was too much detail, so it's now ended up in the closet, I think, with a towel around it. So,
If anybody's got an African room in their house,
Put it on the mantle right there.
yeah, yeah. So Mark is willing to sell that to you for your Africa room if you need it. So, well, very good. So, all right. We always, I think to have fellowship and laughter, that's part of being an encouraged group, isn't it? So that's good this morning. So, good time. So, with that, Martha, if you would read Acts 19, 23 through 27.
After that, it's kind of hard to read. About that time, a major disturbance occurred in regard to the way. For a man named Demetrius, a silversmith who made silver shrines of Artemis, was bringing considerable business to the craftsmen. He gathered these men together with the workmen of similar trades and said, "Men, you know that our prosperity depends upon this business. You see and hear that not only in Ephesus, but in almost all of Asia, This Paul has persuaded and turned away a considerable number of people, saying that gods made by hands are not gods at all. Not only is there danger that this trade of ours will fall into disrepute, but also that the temple of the great goddess Artemis will be regarded as worthless, and that she whom all of Asia and the world worship will even be dethroned from her magnificence.
Thank you, Mar. So in verse 23 there in chapter 19, it says, about that time. To what time is that referring? Look back one verse. What had happened in the prior verse? Yeah, at that time, Paul had sent Timothy and Erastus to Macedonia, which is southern Greece. So those two of his associate missionaries had left. So, and then what occurred about that time that's mentioned there in Acts 19:23, and why did it occur? No. Yeah. Yeah. Says a riot. Yeah, no small disturbance. Some translations a major disturbance. The Living Bible calls it a big blow up. Some translations say riot occurred. So the reason was just what Jamie says, was because of the way and the impact that it was having. So if you look back at, let's see here, I didn't mark that verse. Verse 26, it says, you see and hear that not only in Ephesus, but in almost all of Asia. So the way was growing not only in Asia, but across the continent of Asia, what was then considered the continent of Asia. So it was having a big impact. So remember now, this riot, this major disturbance had followed what in a prior lesson we talked about was a big bonfire where they'd burned 50,000 pieces of silver of magic or occult books. So Paul here in Ephesus is having a major influence, I guess you would say, in the city of Ephesus. So then what is the way, and when was it first referred to as the way? First part. What is the way? That's an easy question. It's what? It's Jesus. It's Christianity. It's the church. So the way is the church or Christianity, obviously founded by Jesus. So when was it first referred to as the way, and who referred to it that way?
Jesus said he was the way, the truth, and the life.
Jesus said he was the way, the truth, and the life. So that probably was the first. But that was small W way, which could be capital W way. But who though first dubbed the name the way to refer to the church or Christianity? Paul, yes, Paul. So when was it? So exactly right. It was Paul in Acts chapter 9, verse 2, and it says, now Paul, still breathing threats and murder against the disciples of the Lord, went to the high priest and asked for letters from him to the synagogues in Damascus, so that if he found any belonging to the way, whether men or women, he might bring them in shackles to Jerusalem. So the first reference to the way was by Paul. He was still Saul, and he was persecuting Christians, and this was more a derogatory term than it was a complimentary term at that point. So why would it be, somebody just said, Martha may just said this, why would it be referred to as the way? Why would Paul have picked that up? It's a way to eternal life. And who said that again? Jesus. Very good. So in John 14:6, Jesus said, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes through the Father except through me. So who led the riot in Ephesus, and what was his occupation? Demetrius led the riot, and what was his occupation? He was a silversmith, so we might call Demetrius the union shop leader or the foreman as such. So evidently he was kind of heading up the trades group in that way. So what was his concerns about the way? Money. In what way was he concerned about money? What was happening? Yeah, so he was concerned that their souvenir trinket making business might be discredited as such. So people, when they came, remember back now, they've just burned all these occult books and so forth. Probably some of those were about the idol there in Diana, the idol there in Ephesus. So now you've got this other concern that the idol Artemis is being discredited. Their souvenir trinket business selling could go down the tube. So that was his first concern. And then he also had some other supposed concerns. What were they? It would quit worshiping the gods, and he was concerned that Paul was convincing, Becky said that he was concerned that people would quit worshiping Artemis and the false god as such. So he was concerned that Paul was convincing people that gods made by hands are not gods at all. So he was concerned that the image of their trade of making idols, souvenirs, would fall into disrepute. So he was also concerned, what else? He's going to go out of business. So he's concerned that it says, quote, the temple of the great goddess Artemis will be regarded as worthless, and that she whom all of Asia and the world worship will even be dethroned from her magnificence. So do you think this was really his concern, all about Artemis? And no, shaking the head. So back to, what was his real concern? What's that? Concerned that the gospel was going to spread, and that maybe. So what else, though, was he concerned about, we said? About money. Yeah, exactly, Mark says. So I don't think that Artemis was all that concerned about the reputation or image of Artemis, other than if it hurt his trinket or his souvenir selling business. So again, he mentions that the reputation of Artemis might be harmed. So if it was harmed, then his souvenir business would not be as profitable as it was. So when people came to see the temple, of course, they would have to buy a souvenir. They had to buy their T-shirt as such, we talked about. So Demetrius and his union were making souvenir silver idols of Artemis for people to take home with them. So if people stopped coming to Ephesus to see the temple, what would happen to him and his fellow union members as such, fellow tradesmen? Business would dry up, wouldn't it? So they would lose a big portion of their business. So what did Demetrius' concern say about the work of Paul and his fellow missionaries? We said that earlier. Being very effective, very successful as such. They said that it was spreading all over Asia, not just in Ephesus, but the way was becoming prevalent all over Asia. So the number of believers were becoming significant enough that it was becoming a threat to the silversmith souvenir business. So the souvenirs, this reminds me kind of, Martha doesn't remember this. So years ago when we went to, this is years and years ago, we went to New York. So we went, I think, in the Empire State Building. So I remember, we can't find it now, it's probably in the closet along with that African statue. But we bought a little 3-inch tall replica of the Empire State Building as a souvenir. And I think we were bringing that home to one of the girls.
Rachel.
Bringing it home to Rachel. So she does remember it. So I thought you didn't remember.
I found it the other day when I was cleaning out a closet.
Oh, she found it the other day, so that prompted her memory.
It was.
So we should have brought that. We could have shown that as show and tell. But anyway, so that's similar here, I think, to what maybe Demetrius and his buddies were making. Ours wasn't out of silver. Ours out of, I don't know what, aluminum or something. I don't know. But anyway, so, it's a little 3-inch replica that, we brought home to Rachel as a souvenir, and I can see people going to Ephesus and bringing similar items home as well. So why do you think Luke, who is the writer of Acts, used the term the way there in Acts 19:23 rather than the church or Christianity?
Was it called the church then? I mean, Christians? Was it called? It wasn't called Christian then, was it?
Mm. Okay. Martha says she didn't think the term church was established then. I'm not sure about that. That may be or may not be. Established in Antioch. Yeah,
It was
don't
first
know.
called Christians in Antioch.
Yeah, so the church, capital C, was established obviously at Pentecost. Now, was it called, local churches called churches at that point? I don't know, because they were meeting in the synagogue. So that's a good question, is when that occurred. And Jeff says that the way was really viewed at that point in time as a different sect of Judaism, that they were left the old traditional concept of Judaism, and this was a new kind of form as such of Judaism. Certainly both of those are good observations as such. One, I think, is, again, if you go back to Christ's statement, there is only one way, where I think maybe Paul here was drawing a distinction between the Greeks, the Romans, those in Ephesus. They worship many gods. And here he's saying there is one way. I guess he could have said one church. I don't know that it would have the same power as one way. So I think maybe, what do you think if Paul and his buddies had gone and said there were many ways to heaven, would there have been a problem there in Ephesus? Probably not, because they wouldn't. Cause then they could make souvenirs about the way too, couldn't they? But now he's saying saying there's only one way, so he is discrediting Artemis, the false god, one of many gods. He's discrediting it. So it's the same today. If you as a believer, I think, says there is only one way to heaven, then what kind of response you're going to get from some people?
It doesn't matter as long as you're sincere.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. Any way is okay as long as you're sincere, Martha's saying. Mark was shaking his head, I'm sorry.
Look at hatred,
Gonna get backlash, hatred, Mark says. Jan said, what? I'm sorry, Jan. She forgot. So, arguments, you're gonna get arguments. You're gonna get pushback. If there's a lot of people today don't want to hear there's only one way. So in Matthew chapter 10, verses 21 through 22, it says, now brother will betray brother to death, and a father his child, and children will rise up against parents and cause them to be put to death. And you will be, just what Mark said, hated by all because of my name. But it is the one who has endured to the end who will be saved. So as believers, if we say there's one way, we can expect trouble. John 16:33 quotes Jesus, and this verse says, these things I've spoken to you, so that in me you may have peace. In the world you have tribulation. But take courage, I have overcome the world. So here, Paul, obviously, throughout his life, faced hatred. He faced tribulation, and here we're going to see this arising in significant level in Ephesus. So what was Demetrius and the silversmith's true motive in causing the riot? We've talked about that.
Cause people to come against Paul and his teachings.
Cause people to come against Paul and his teaching, certainly, and then the result would be business. So the motive, I think, there by Demetrius and his buddies were greed, the love of money. So again, not so different than a lot of motive today and what folks do. Yeah, this is how they're making their living. So yeah, they're really upset, and we're going to see how upset they are here in just a minute. But they're really upset. So no question. So what did Demetrius and the silversmiths fear? They could be shut down. The fear of loss. That's one of Satan's, I think, primary weapons is the fear of loss. So, other than money, what do we fear the loss of? Family members. Fear, yeah, and we just read those verses that as a believer, you can be separated from your father, from brother and sister, and so forth. So that, again, a major tool of Satan's is fear of loss of family members. What else?
Friends.
Fear of loss of friends, yeah, that supposed at least friends, you thought they were former friends, we might say, that if your lifestyle changes and you become a true believer, then some of those old friends may not be your friend anymore. So, yep, good. Fear of loss of job. If you're too vocal in your work and if you're really promoting Jesus in this day and time, yes, you could lose your job. So, fear of the loss of status. Yeah, exactly. That a lot of people look down on Christians as bumpkins and not very sophisticated and so forth. So your status could be impaired if you were outspoken as a Christian or believer. Yeah, good point. Jeff says they would lose their identity. Remember, this temple of Artemis was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, so it was a big deal. So the people of Ephesus in that area identified with Artemis in that it gave us prestige, it gave us position, it gave us status. So they could, if Artemis was discredited, then they could lose identity.
Pride.
Yeah, pride. It's kind of the underlying issue. Okay. So whom did Demetrius say in Acts 19:27 was worshiping Artemis? And do you find anything interesting in this? Yeah, all Asia and the world was worshiping Artemis. Do you think that was true? No. Yeah, no. So what's interesting about that? That was what, Mark?
That was their vision, that it would spread across all the world.
That was their vision, that Artemis would be worshipped across the world, yeah. So their vision was being tainted, I guess you would say as such, or damaged. Do we see that same type of conflict today?
It's huge, right? I mean, this exact scenario is going on right now for the last 5 years with our trans LGBT movement.
Yeah.
Exact same thing. I mean, everybody's afraid to stand up because of fear of pride, their job, their status,
Yeah.
and so they use that against Christians.
Yeah. So Mark says a similar conflict occurring in the world today. Use the example of LGBTQ, and they've added some new letters to it too. I'm not sure what they mean, but there's a couple of more letters now. So, but anyway, the conflict is between a worldly worldview and a Christian worldview.
And this is kind of like a pep rally, you know, with the worship, you know.
This
Sounds like a pep rally. You're just trying to get everybody to get enthusiastic and riled up.
yeah.
Even if it's not true. And I think a lot of things today, especially in politics, are said to just get people riled up and just to come to your cause just because there's a larger issue that's important. It's the world that's important.
Yeah, I think you're being kind of kind saying it's a pep rally because he's riled them up. You're exactly right. It's a riot. It's what we're going to see as
Well, you're getting people to agree with you.
getting people to agree with you, exactly. So good. So I think in this, we see the beginning here of a tactic that Demetrius is using that a little bit later in the lesson we're going to address. And that tactic he's using is used often today in politics. So with that, we're going to hold that for a minute. So Martha, if you would read Acts 19:28-31.
When they'd heard this and were filled with rage, they began shouting, saying, "Great is Artemis of the Ephesians." The city was filled with confusion, and they rushed together into the theater, dragging along Gaius and Aristarchus, Paul's Macedonian traveling companions. And when Paul wanted to go into the assembly, the disciples would not let him. Also, some of the Asiarchs, take my glasses off, who were friends of his, sent word to him and repeatedly urged him not to venture into the theater.
Okay, thank you, Mark. So when the silversmiths, and you remember now, it's not just silversmiths because it says tradesmen, so it's expanded beyond silversmiths into other trades that were depending on Artemis and souvenirs and whatever they did. So they heard Demetrius' speech, and what was their reaction to it? What's it say? They were filled with rage and cried out, what? Great is Artemis of the Ephesians. So this same word, filled with rage, was used previously in Acts. What's that? Very good. Right before Stephen was stoned, the reaction was they were to Stephen. The Jews had to Stephen's sermon resulted in them being filled with rage and then ultimately stoning Stephen. So this is the level of animosity, of reaction now that Demetrius is getting from the people. So what was the reaction of the city of Ephesus as a whole, though, and why? What's it say about how did they react? They were confused. They were filled with confusion. So the average person in Ephesus did not know what all this hubbub was actually about. So, but like any mob, they just kind of mindlessly joined in with everybody else and followed along. So most people you'll find are followers and can be easily led. So people went out of clarity often occurs confusion. So here they were readily following a leader. They didn't even know what it was all about. They were confused.
See that today. When logic falls out, we have gaze for gossip, not understanding those two things are not compatible at all.
Jeff says we see this today, that when logic falls out, I think he said, then confusion or gossip occurs and people follow along. So I think one of the major tools Satan uses today to generate, well, what do you think? What are some of the major tools Satan uses today to create confusion? Here you had a verbal speaker back in this day and time, but today we have social media. Yeah, if it's in social media, it's bound to be true, right? So, on the internet, it's bound to be true. Yeah, exactly. And even, I think at times, what's the right word? Unintentionally, texts and emails and other forms of written communication can generate misunderstandings because you don't have the context as such. So here the people are confused. They didn't have the context. They didn't even know what they were all in a rage about, but they were just following Demetrius along as he went. Jeff, do you have, yeah?
Yeah, if you go all the way back to Genesis even, Satan uses chaos to impact order. And that's what's happening.
Yeah.
Chaos.
Yeah. So that's the answer to the next question. Jeff has jumped ahead. Thank you, Jeff. So Satan thrives on confusion, but God is a God of order. 1 Corinthians 14:40 says, but all things must be done properly and in an orderly way. So another tool of Satan there is confusion. So what did the people do? In Acts 19:29?
They took two of Paul's companions and dragged them into the assembly.
Yeah, they rushed together into this theater, and they dragged along with them Gaius and Aristarchus, and these were now Paul's traveling companions and such. So, Johnny, put up that next picture, please. This amphitheater was no small place. There's the ruins. The ruins of it still exist in Ephesus today. So it's thought to have seated somewhere between 24,000 and 25,000 people. So this was a big uprising, you might say, as such. So this was no small thing going on here. So as Martha said, they dragged Gaius and Aristarchus into this amphitheater. So what do you know about these two guys? What do you know first about Gaius? Anything? Very good. John, yes, he said, I don't know if he wrote the letter to him, but John said he loved Gaius. This is in 3 John chapter 1, verse 1. May just be one chapter in there. So he says, to the elder, to the beloved Gaius, whom I love in truth. So evidently, John and Gaius were close buddies. Remember, John became ultimately one of the pastors in Ephesus. So they might have connected there. Don't know. What else we know? We do know that both Gaius and Aristarchus, we just said, were accompanied Paul to Macedonia as missionaries. We know that. Where was Gaius from? Anybody know? Get a gold star for this one. Derbe. He was from Derbe, which would be modern-day Turkey. So Derbe was about 200 to 250 miles east of Ephesus. So he traveled a pretty good way to get to Ephesus. So a church was established in Derbe. And 1 Corinthians 1:14 tells us that Paul baptized Gaius. So and Romans 16:23 tells us that at some point Gaius hosted Paul and the whole church. So Gaius had a house church at one point in time that he sponsored or hosted. So what do we know then about Aristarchus? Where was he from? Get a gold star again if you know. That what?
I can't even say the word.
Thessalonica, yes. Aristarchus was from Thessalonica, so Acts 27 verses 1 through 3 says Aristarchus accompanied Paul to where? To Rome. So Aristarchus was a fellow prisoner with Paul in Rome. So he stuck pretty through thick and thin, you might say, with Paul. So evidently Aristarchus was also known to Philemon, because Paul, in his closing of his letter to Philemon, says, Aristarchus also greeted Philemon. So these guys, a lot of these guys knew each other as such back then. So what are we told in Acts chapter 19, verses 28 through 31 that Paul wanted to do?
He wanted to go join them.
He wanted to go join who?
Crowd.
He wanted to go join the crowd. What did he want to do when he did that? He wanted to go in the theater and do what?
Probably defend his friends.
Address the mob. He
Yeah.
wanted to go into the theater and address the mob. So fortunately, the disciples and some Asiarchs, the Asiarchs were ranking officials in that area. So they were important guys. So some of those guys and disciples prevented Paul from getting to the amphitheater. So evidently these Asiarchs were possibly believers, and they had scouted out the situation in the amphitheater and in order to provide Paul intelligence as to what was going on and to prevent him from going into the amphitheater, because what could have happened to Paul? Could have been killed. Yes, right, because again, remember the words that were used, these same words filled with rage resulted in Stephen being killed. It could be the same thing with Paul. So what do you think would have happened? Well, we just kind of answered that. What do you think could happen if Paul had been able to do what he wanted to do? Could be killed. It certainly would have been probably a bad result. So Paul, what did Paul do? Probably reluctantly, what did he do? He didn't go. So he followed the advice of these disciples, as Asiarchs, and he didn't go. And Proverbs 11:14 says, in abundance of counselors there is victory. So Paul listened to his counselors and didn't go to the amphitheater. So Martha, if you would read verses 32 through 34. Whoop.
So then some were shouting one thing and some another, for the assembly was in confusion, and the majority did not know for what reason they'd come together. Some of the crowd concluded it was Alexander, since the Jews had put him forward, and having motioned with his hand, Alexander was intending to make a defense to the assembly. But when they recognized that he was a Jew, a single outcry arose from them all as they shouted for about 2 hours, "Great is Artemis of the Ephesians."
All right, well, what was the situation of the crowd? We continue to see in those verses. Confusion. The crowd, thank you, Jan. The crowd was in confusion. Some were shouting one thing and others were shouting something else. So most of them probably didn't even know why they were there, why they had come together. So again, it reminded me of the mobs on college campuses that we saw. Because when they were asked, they were shouting from the river to the sea. And some were asked, well, what are you talking about? What's the river? What's the sea? Some of them didn't even know what river they were talking about, what sea they were talking about. Others who actually knew that the Jordan River was the eastern boundary of Israel and the Mediterranean Sea was the western boundary of Israel. They might have known that, but they would say, well, I don't understand. I didn't know that meant that for the annihilation of Israel. They didn't, truthfully or not, they would say, I didn't know that. So again, they came together. Some were actually paid to be there, and these rites as such on college campuses. And just like in a similar way to the silversmiths in Ephesus, they had a financial interest in being there. They were being paid to be there. The silversmiths had a financial interest. They were afraid of losing their business. So they here, when I think about this mob in Ephesus had some people who know what was going on, but a lot of people were just there confused, joining in the crowd.
I heard on the news this week that there is an organization it just pays people to demonstrate.
Yeah,
And that's their job.
yeah.
They just go all over the country to do that.
Yep. So they've got a financial interest in it. The motive is greed or money, love of money. So what did some try to get to excuse me. Who did some try to get to intervene to stop the riot? Alexander. So it says some pushed Alexander forward. He doesn't sound like he's a willing participant here, so he got pushed it forward. It reminded me of that old movie Stripes, the 1981 movie. If you remember Stripes, they were looking for a volunteer for something, and all of them took one step back and just left the one guy out forward as the volunteer. So it kind of reminded me here. They've just kind of pushed Alexander out here. You go on out there and see if you can't talk to the Jews, talk to the rioters and such. So why would some have this person have Alexander try to intervene in this? Yes, Jeff? Oh, he made a gesture.
He did. He raised his hand.
He raised his hand. It's kind of like being at an auction. You scratch your nose. Yeah. I was just scratching my nose. I wasn't bidding. Yeah. So, yeah. But why Alexander? Why do you think he would be the guy to put out there? What kind of name is Alexander? Roman or Greek. Yeah, Gentile name. Says a Gentile name, so he was more than like a Hellenistic Jew. He was a converted Jew, but he had a Greek name, so he was Greek by ethnicity. So they thought they would put him out there, and he could identify with the Gentiles there in Ephesus. So what were the Jews trying to do by putting Alexander out there to address the riot? What was their purpose in doing that? His intent was to defend Paul. Yeah, defense to the. I don't think he's trying to defend Paul. Who do you think? I think he was trying to defend somebody else. I think he was trying to defend the Jews. They put him out there to say, I think, hey, that way they're not part of us. We're the Jews over here. We don't have anything to do with those folks. So he was out there trying to apologize to the mob and explain to the Jews that they weren't opposed to Artemis. It was okay with them. Don't lump us in with these folks in the way. So ironically, there's something ironic about this position that Alexander, I think, was taking anyway, to try to separate himself from Christians. What's ironic about it? Should the Jews have been just as opposed to the worship of Artemis as the Christians were? Yeah, so I think it's ironic here the Jews, maybe that's not the right word, the Jews would have or should have the same opposition to worshiping this false god Artemis as the way did, but they were trying to placate the Gentiles in this riot, the tradesmen, the silversmiths, by saying, hey, we're not part of that, so don't paint us with that brush as such. So how did the mob receive Alexander? Yeah, they were screaming. They shouted him down. So they didn't really care if he's a Jew or not. They didn't recognize Alexander. They lumped him in with the Christians, even though he didn't want to be. So the mob did not draw a distinction between the way and the Jews. So it says the crowd shouted for 2 hours. So the throat lozenges sale business was really booming there. Those folks did well probably after that. So, all right, we got a few minutes left. Let's try to get close to the end anyway. Martha, read 35 through 41, please.
After quieting the crowd, the town clerk said, Men of Ephesus, what person is there after all who does not know that the city of the Ephesians is guardian of the temple of the great Artemis, and of the image which fell down from the sky. So since these are undeniable facts, you ought to keep calm and do nothing rash. For you have brought these men here who are neither temple robbers nor blasphemers of our goddess. So then if Demetrius and the craftsmen who are with him have a complaint against anyone, the courts are in session, and the proconsuls are available. Have them bring charges against one another. But if you want anything beyond this, it shall be settled in the lawful assembly. For indeed we are in danger of being accused of a riot in connection with today's events, since there is no reason for it, and in this connection we will be unable to account for this disorderly gathering. After saying this, he dismissed the assembly.
All right, so there in, wrong page. So who stepped in after Alexander and was successful in stopping and dispersing the mob?
Town clerk.
The town clerk steps in to speak to the mob. The town clerk was basically the chief administrative officer of Ephesus. So he might be the, like we'd say, maybe the city manager or something like that today. So he steps in. So where did the town clerk say that Artemis had come from? The sky. Artemis fell from the sky. So some think that Artemis was a meteorite that fell in there in Ephesus. So they took this meteorite and made it a goddess as such. So what did the town clerk say about his statement of where Artemis came from? He states something that it is an, what's that, Don? Undeniable truth. So this is the same type or similar argument that Demetrius used when he said all of Asia and the world was worshiping Artemis. Of course, as we said, all the world was not worshiping Artemis, and this was this an undeniable truth? Think this was an undeniable truth? No, of course not. It's not an undeniable truth either. So today, we talked about this argument. Today you hear politicians making the same kind of argument all the time. Everybody knows it's an undeniable truth. The whole world does this, or so forth. This is often called the bandwagon fallacy, or argumentum ad populum, sometimes referred to as appeal to popularity, or everybody knows fallacy. So in essence, the fallacy relies on a flawed assumption. Everybody knows, or it's an undeniable truth. So they're acting like this is the case, but in reality, it's not the case. So people often employ this fallacy in an effort to mask the fact that they do not actually have an argument. So you can say, well, everybody knows this when it's really not the case, but if you say everybody knows this, then you're trying to make it that's obviously the situation where it's not. So how did the clerk describe Gaius and Aristarchus? They were not blasphemers nor robbers. So they're saying that we can't figure out anything that these folks have done, so we don't have a case against Gaius and Aristarchus. If you think you got a case, then take it to the court rather than acting as a mob. So why did the town clerk, you think, take this position he took? So Jeff says that the situation had reached a fever pitch, and that he did not want them destroying the city, first of all, and that if they did destruction, they were under Roman rule, and that Rome would come in and take care of the situation. So also, if the city got destroyed and so forth, the town administrator here, he could lose his job, possibly, but possibly he could lose his life too, as well as others who started this riot. So he has some maybe selfish motives here to see that this did not result in broad destruction as such. So, so because of these concerns, he was disbanding as such the riot. So, so I think in contrast, this town clerk saw that there could be real punishment for these riots by the Romans, whereas back again to our analogy or example on the riots on the college campuses, there was no real punishment as such for what went on. So there was destruction was rampant in those. So again, there was no concern, no fear of loss there. So the riots continued. Here, the town clerk made it pretty clear, if this continues, then there are going to be real consequences. Yes, Becky? What's that, Becky? No, I don't think riots didn't happen. Maybe there are protests that happened, but not structural damage. Yeah, their protests maybe happened, but not structural damage where buildings are being torn down and that kind of thing. So that's the difference. So, yeah, I think it's gone to a new level. Invaded one of the buildings. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
We're allowing it lawlessness to continue now today. A lot of our cities and the college campuses, it expands the protest to the riots. And
Yeah.
a buddy of mine, he had a lady just moved down here and got a job with his company, and she's from Seattle. We don't see it on the news anymore, but if you'll remember, this intersection of Seattle was controlled by Antifa. That is still going on. She lived there, and that's the reason she finally packed up her family and left.
Yeah.
Her church went out to help the community, and Antifa told the church to go back home. You're not wanted here.
Yeah.
And that was the final straw.
Yeah. So we're seeing it. We're not seeing it on the news anymore, but as much. But it does continues. I'm trying to summarize Mark's comments because we're out of time. But with that, you've got homework. Your homework is, we didn't get to the takeaways or personal applications, and I think there's some good ones from this lesson. So think about what would be your personal application or takeaway from the lesson today. We'll start with there next week, and then we move into Acts 20, verses 17 through 38. And from there we get to the actual book of Ephesians, believe it or not. It's our letter of Ephesians. So with that,